I moved back home to reconnect with my family, and instead walked straight into the most terrifying situation of my life when my neighbor made my 4-year-old nephew disappear. What that woman confessed in front of the entire neighborhood changed everything we thought we knew about her. My nephew was missing for 6 hours and 42 minutes. I know the exact time because I kept checking my phone every few minutes like that would somehow make him appear faster. 6 hours and 42 minutes where I genuinely did not know if I would ever see him again. I need to back up because this story does not make sense without the context, and I want it to make sense. I want you to understand exactly how we got there. About 18 months before everything fell apart, I moved back to my hometown. I had spent almost a decade living in Seattle, building a career in logistics management, slowly growing apart from my family in the way that happens when you get too busy and too comfortable and too far away. My mom had been sick the year before, nothing life-threatening but a wake-up call, and my younger sister Danny had basically been holding the whole family together by herself. When I visited for Christmas that year, Danny looked exhausted in a way that scared me. She had dark circles under her eyes, and she was thinner than I remembered, and she barely smiled. I drove home after that Christmas, and I sat in my apartment, and I thought about what I was actually doing with my life. I had a good job. I had a nice apartment. I had friends who I grabbed drinks with on Fridays. But my family needed me, and I was 1,500 miles away, pretending that phone calls were enough. I put in for a transfer. It took 7 months, but it came through. I found a house to rent in the neighborhood where Danny lived, 2 streets over from her, because she had a 4-year-old son named Marcus who I barely knew, and I wanted to fix that. I wanted to be the aunt who showed up. I wanted to be present for once. Moving back was messy in all the emotional ways you would expect. My mom cried. Danny cried. I cried at a gas station off the highway because I was listening to a song from high school, and it hit me all at once that I had been gone so long and I had missed so much. But I was home, and for the first few months, it was genuinely good. I was getting to know Marcus properly, spending Saturday mornings at Danny's, taking him to the park, reading him the same 3 books over and over because 4-year-olds do not care about variety. I was rebuilding something I had let go dormant for years, and it felt important in a way that was hard to articulate. The house I was renting was in a quiet residential neighborhood. Small yards, older houses, the kind of street where people have lived for 20 or 30 years and know each other's business whether they want to or not. My next-door neighbor was a woman named Carolyn Voss. I want to be careful about how I describe Carolyn because I think I need to be accurate, not just bitter. She was in her mid-50s, divorced, no children of her own. She had a perfectly maintained yard that she clearly spent a lot of time on. She had a very put-together appearance, always dressed nicely even just to get the mail. She was the first one to introduce herself when I moved in, appeared at my door with a plate of cookies within 48 hours. She was friendly, warm even, and I liked her at first. Looking back now, I can identify the moment the friendliness started to curdle. It was about 3 months in. I had mentioned offhandedly that I was thinking about painting my front shutters a dark green because the current beige was depressing. The next morning, I found a printout of the neighborhood HOA guidelines slipped under my door with the section on exterior colors highlighted in yellow. I thought it was a little odd, but I let it go. I chose a different color and moved on. Then it was the parking. I had a driveway, but sometimes when Danny visited, she would park on the street in front of my house. Carolyn knocked on my door one afternoon while Danny was there and very sweetly, very pleasantly, explained that the street parking in front of her house was technically shared, and she preferred people not park there regularly because it cluttered the view. Danny's car was not in front of Carolyn's house. It was in front of mine. But Carolyn said it so nicely, with such a soft smile, that it took Danny and me about 30 seconds after she left to look at each other and go, "Wait, what just happened?" That was Carolyn's thing. She never said anything outright aggressive. She was never obviously rude. She wrapped every complaint and every jab and every power move in this layer of pleasant helpfulness that made you feel like you were the unreasonable one for being bothered by it. I learned later that this is a classic covert narcissist pattern, but at the time I just thought she was difficult in a way I could not quite name. Over the following months, the friction escalated in small but consistent ways. She complained about my porch light being too bright. She left notes about my garbage bins being an inch too far from the curb. She told me, with genuine apparent concern for my well-being, that my front garden looked a little neglected and she could recommend a landscaper. Every single thing she said was delivered with warmth and a smile, and this infuriating tone of doing me a favor. And every single thing chipped away at me a little. I pushed back a few times, gently, and she would look wounded. Actually hurt. Like I had said something cruel to her when all I had done was say, "Actually, Carolyn, my bins are exactly where the HOA requires them to be." She had this talent for reframing any boundary I set as an attack on her and somehow making me feel guilty for it. Danny could not stand her from about the fourth interaction onward. Danny is more instinctive about people than I am, quicker to trust her gut. She kept saying there was something off about Carolyn, something underneath the friendliness that did not feel safe. I told her she was being uncharitable. I said Carolyn was just one of those overly particular neighbors and I could manage it. I was wrong about that. Marcus had started coming to my house on Saturday mornings because I lived closer to his favorite park, and it was easier for Danny to drop him off at mine on her way to her weekend shift at the hospital. She was a nurse and worked alternating Saturdays. Marcus and I would have breakfast, usually cereal and toast because my cooking skills have limits, and then we would walk to the park and he would spend an hour on the swings telling me elaborate stories about trucks. He was a sweet kid. Serious in that way some little kids are, very deliberate about everything, always thinking before he spoke. He had Danny's eyes and he was obsessed with garbage trucks specifically, which I found endearing. He would hear one coming down the street and absolutely light up. Carolyn met Marcus a few times during his visits. She was always very attentive around him in a way I noticed but did not think much about at the time. She would bring him cookies or little toys, the kind of inexpensive things from a dollar store bin. She asked me questions about him. How old was he? Did he have siblings? Did Danny work a lot? What were his interests? I answered her questions. He was 4, no siblings yet. Danny worked hard, he loved trucks. I did not think much of it. She was a woman who did not have children and was probably just finding the presence of a small child charming. Lots of adults love kids. I did not read it as anything sinister. That is the part of this story that I have had to work through a lot afterward. The part where I replay every conversation with Carolyn and realize how many things she said and did that I explained away because I was looking for charitable interpretations. Because I wanted to believe in the best version of people. Because I thought her worst quality was being passive-aggressive about my parking situation. The Saturday it happened started normally. Danny dropped Marcus off at just after 8 in the morning. He came in wearing his green dinosaur backpack, which he refused to take off even indoors because he said it had his important things in it. He had a juice box and a granola bar and 2 Matchbox cars inside. Those were his important things. We had breakfast. We watched half an episode of a cartoon about trains. Around 9:30, we headed to the park. It was a warm day, late spring, and the park was busier than usual. There were a few other kids on the playground equipment and some parents on the benches around the edges. Marcus headed straight for the swings, which was always his first stop. I pushed him for a while, and then he wanted to go on the climbing structure, so I let him go while I stood close by. This is the part I have gone over in my head 1,000 times. I was watching him. I was right there. He was on the climbing structure, and then he climbed down, and I thought he was heading toward the slide. There was a dad chasing his toddler past me, and I stepped to the side and looked away for maybe 15 seconds, maybe a bit more, while I made sure I did not trip over the little one. When I looked back, Marcus was not at the slide. I was not immediately alarmed. Kids that age are fast and unpredictable. I walked around the whole play structure. I checked the sandbox. I called his name. Other parents started looking too, that automatic solidarity that happens when an adult is clearly searching for a child. He was not there. I am not going to pretend I was calm. I was not calm. I called his name louder and I was walking fast, then running, going back and forth across the park because my brain could not accept that he was not there. A woman at the park helped me check the bathrooms. He was not in the bathrooms. I called Danny. She did not pick up. She was at work and they have a no phones policy in certain departments. I called the main hospital line and left a message. Then I called 911. The officer who arrived was a man named Detective Reyes, though at that point he was just one of two patrol officers who responded first. He was calm and efficient, and he took my information quickly. They put out a description. 4-year-old boy, brown skin, green dinosaur backpack, red sneakers. They were good, I want to say that. They were thorough and they moved fast. I stood at that park, shaking so hard I had to sit down on a bench. A woman whose name I never got stayed with me and handed me water and did not say useless things, just sat next to me, and I have thought about her kindness many times since. Danny arrived about 40 minutes after my call, white-faced and running across the park toward me before I even stood up. We held each other, and I kept saying I was sorry, and she kept saying, "Stop, stop, it is not your fault, we need to focus." She was holding herself together with everything she had. I could feel her shaking too. The next hours were the worst of my life. I say that knowing it could have been so much more terrible. I say it knowing how it ended. But in those hours, I did not know how it would end, and I was living in the space between knowing and not knowing where my nephew was, and that space is a terrible place to be. We were at Danny's house by then, coordinating with police, going through everything we could think of. Who had seen Marcus recently? Whether anyone had expressed unusual interest in him. I mentioned Carolyn, I mentioned her questions about him, but even as I said it out loud, I felt like I was reaching, like I was trying to make a neighbor dispute into something it was not. One of the officers noted it down. They said they would look into everything. It was Priya who called me at almost 4 in the afternoon. Priya Shah? I had known her since 7th grade. We had been close through high school, drifted during college, and then lost touch almost entirely once I moved to Seattle. I had heard through mutual friends that she had moved back to town herself about a year after I did. We had traded a couple of Instagram comments, but had not actually spoken. She called my cell number because apparently she had kept it all these years, and she had seen the neighborhood alert that had gone out through the community app about a missing child matching Marcus's description. "I think I know something," she said when I picked up. "I'm not sure if I'm right and I don't want to waste your time, but I need to tell you." I told her to tell me everything. Priya lived 3 blocks from my house in a place she had been renting for about 8 months. She said that around 10:30 that morning, she had been walking her dog past Carolyn's house. She knew Carolyn by sight from the neighborhood and thought nothing of seeing her. But Priya said she had seen Carolyn get out of her car in the driveway carrying something. A bag and what looked like a small person or a child who was very still. Priya said she had told herself it was probably a sleeping grandchild or a neighbor's kid, something normal. She had not thought more about it, but when she saw the alert she put it together and she called me. I did not wait, I told Detective Reyes. They went to Carolyn's house. I do not know exactly what happened in those first minutes because I was not allowed to be there. I was at Danny's house with a victim's advocate coordinator who kept offering me tea. I did not want tea, I wanted my nephew. 40 minutes after Priya called me, Detective Reyes called to tell me Marcus had been found at Carolyn's house. He was safe. He was a little confused and a little tired, but he was physically unharmed. I have cried in my life. I have cried at funerals and breakups and bad days. Nothing was like that moment. Nothing before or since. Danny made a sound I have no words for, and then we were both just holding each other in her kitchen crying until we could not breathe. Marcus was brought to us by a female officer who carried him in while he was half asleep and clutching his granola bar wrapper from his backpack. He had the look of a kid who had just woken up somewhere confusing and had not quite decided whether to be upset about it. He saw me and said my name and held out his arms. I held him for a long time. Carolyn was taken in for questioning that evening. I did not know the full details of what she said to police initially. I knew she had been brought in. I knew charges were being filed. I did not know what her explanation was. 2 weeks later was the annual neighborhood block party on Elm Street, which is the main road that runs through the center of our neighborhood. This was an established tradition, apparently. Tables and folding chairs set out along the closed street, potluck dishes, kids running around, neighbors catching up. It had been planned for months, and no one canceled it despite everything that had happened, or maybe because of it, because the neighborhood was shaken and people needed something communal to hold on to. Danny and I talked about whether to go. My mom came too. Priya came, which was the first time I had seen her in person in probably 7 years, and standing there on that street looking at her felt strange and also exactly right somehow, like she had shown up in the worst moment, and that meant something. She looked the same. A little older, obviously, but the same Priya who used to help me cram for biology tests in her parents' kitchen. She hugged me, and I hugged her back, and she said she was so glad Marcus was okay, and I said I would never be able to repay her, and she said do not be ridiculous. We stood together at the party. The neighborhood had that particular energy of people who all know the same heavy thing and are not quite sure how to hold it alongside potato salad and lemonade. People came over to say they were glad Marcus was okay. People told me how frightening it must have been. I thanked them and meant it. I did not expect Carolyn to show up. She was out on bail, I knew that much. Charges had been filed and the case was moving, but she had been released while it all proceeded. The detective had told me this was standard and that it did not mean anything about the outcome. But I did not expect her to actually come to the block party. I do not know what I thought she would do, hide inside her house, I suppose. But there she was, about an hour into the event, walking down the street with a dish in her hands like she had every right to be there. Like nothing had happened. The neighborhood went quiet in that particular way where everyone has noticed something and no one knows quite what to do about it. I watched her walk to one of the tables. I watched people step back slightly. Nobody approached her, but nobody stopped her either. I turned to Danny and said we should go. Danny's jaw was tight and she said yes, we probably should. My mom put her hand on my arm. I do not know what Carolyn was thinking. That is the honest answer. I do not know if she thought people would act normally around her, or if she wanted to make some kind of statement, or if she was just completely divorced from how other people saw her. Covert narcissists, I have read since, often have a stunning inability to understand how their actions land on others. They reframe everything to center their own narrative and genuinely cannot see the damage they cause. What I know is that she stood at that table alone for a while, and I watched her scanning the crowd. Her eyes landed on me. She walked toward me. I felt Priya's hand on my elbow, just a light touch but steady. She was there. Carolyn stopped a few feet from me. She looked the way she always looked, put together, composed, a small, careful smile. "I'm glad Marcus is okay," she said. I did not say anything. I literally could not form a response because my brain had stalled. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," she said, "about my intentions." And here is the thing about Carolyn. Even then, even right there at that block party 2 weeks after she had taken my 4-year-old nephew from a park and brought him to her house, she sounded reasonable. She sounded like a woman who had been unfairly mischaracterized. Her voice was the same warm register it always was. She had this way of speaking that pulled you toward her version of events even when her version of events was insane. "He followed me," she said. "He recognized me and he followed me out of the park. I was going to bring him home, I just needed to stop at my house first." I found my voice. "You kept him at your house for 6 hours. "He was sleeping," she said. "He fell asleep in the car. I did not want to disturb him." "You did not call anyone," I said. "You did not call me. You did not call his mother. You did not call the police." "I was going to," she said. "You have to understand I care about Marcus. I have always cared about him. I just wanted." She stopped. I have thought about what she was going to say. I have turned it over many times. I just wanted. What did she want? What was the end of that sentence? I think the block party, the presence of so many people, and maybe something inside Carolyn herself that had been building under all that careful, composed surface, did something. I think the pressure of it broke something loose. Because what came out of her next was not a defense. "I wanted to know what it was like," she said. Her voice changed. It went quieter and the edges of the careful smile fell away. "To have someone, to have a child who looked at me the way he looks at you." The crowd around us had gone very still. People who had been trying to look like they were not listening were now completely still, turned toward us without pretending otherwise. "I had a daughter," Carolyn said. "She was taken from me, by her father, in the divorce. I haven't seen her in 11 years. I did not know that. Nobody had told me that. I do not think most neighbors knew. "I know that doesn't make it right," she said. "I know, She looked at the dish in her hands, a casserole she had carried to the party like nothing was wrong, and something in her face collapsed. I don't know who I am anymore. I had a plan for my life and it didn't work out. And I watched you with him every Saturday and it was. She stopped again. She was crying now. Real crying, not performed. I did not know then, and I do not know now whether to read that as genuine grief or manipulation or both. With Carolyn, I am not sure those things were ever entirely separate. I need help, she said. I know I need help. And then, quietly, into the silence of about 40 of our neighbors, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. Detective Reyes was at the party. I learned later that he had been there specifically because he had been informed Carolyn was likely to attend and he wanted to see what happened. He stepped forward at that point and asked Carolyn to come with him, very calmly, very professionally. She went without resistance. She walked away from that block party with him and she did not look back at me. People stood around for a moment, not quite knowing what to do. Then someone put on music and slowly people started talking again because that is what people do. Life reasserts itself. My mom came and stood next to me. She put her arm around me and did not say anything. She just stood there, which was exactly right. Priya appeared on my other side with a glass of lemonade. She handed it to me and said, "Drink this. You look like you need sugar." I laughed. It was a real laugh and it surprised me. I will tell you what happened in the legal case, because I think people deserve to know. Carolyn was charged with 1 count of felony kidnapping and 1 count of false imprisonment. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea initially. The case took about 8 months to move through the system. During that time, as part of the discovery process and her own psychological evaluation, it came out that Carolyn had an extensive history that explained a great deal about who she was. She had been in a deeply contentious divorce 12 years earlier. Her ex-husband, who had been the primary earner, had obtained primary custody of their daughter Lily through a legal process that Carolyn's own attorneys, according to documents, had described as manipulative and unfair. Carolyn had attempted to fight for custody for several years and then had essentially stopped engaging with the process. She had not seen Lily since Lily was 9 years old. Lily was now 20 years old and, according to news coverage, had not attempted to make contact with her mother. I am not telling you this because it excuses what Carolyn did. It does not excuse it. Marcus was 4 years old and he spent 6 hours and 42 minutes away from his family without anyone knowing where he was, and his mother went through something no parent should have to go through. Nothing about Carolyn's history makes that okay. I am telling you because I think it's true that broken people break other people, and sometimes understanding why something happened is not the same as forgiving it or minimizing it. I held both things at the same time for a long time afterward. Carolyn pleaded no contest about 5 months into proceedings. Her attorney and the prosecutor reached a deal. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, mandatory psychiatric counseling, community service, and a restraining order that required her to stay away from Marcus, Danny, and me. She sold her house and moved before her probation period was even 6 months in. I do not know where she went. I have not tried to find out. The house next to mine sat empty for 4 months, and then a couple moved in with a teenager and a big golden retriever. They introduced themselves the first week and were completely normal in every way, and I have never once had a problem with them. After it was all over, I had a period of what I can only describe as delayed falling apart. I held myself together through the crisis and the police involvement and the legal process, and then one afternoon, about 4 months later, I was giving Marcus a bath because Danny had asked me to babysit, and he was playing with his plastic tugboat, and he looked up at me with those serious eyes, and he said, out of nowhere, "That lady had a lot of stuffed animals." I said, "What, buddy?" "At her house," he said. "She had a lot. She let me hold the rabbit one." And I sat on the edge of that bathtub and I just started crying. Quietly, because I did not want to scare him, but I could not stop. He looked at me with his head tilted and said, "Are you okay?" In that careful way he has, and I said, "Yes, I'm okay," and he went back to his tugboat and said, "Okay," in a tone that suggested he was not entirely convinced, but was willing to let it go. I called my therapist the next day. I had been seeing her intermittently since moving back, and I started going consistently after that. It helped. It helped a lot. Something else happened during all of this. Priya and I started talking again. It began with texts after the block party, just checking in, and then it turned into long phone calls, and by the end of the summer we were having dinner together once or twice a month. It turned out she had moved back to town for reasons similar to mine. Her dad had had a health scare. She had reassessed things. She had left a job she hated in Chicago and come home and was now working remotely in marketing and building her life back from scratch. We talked about what it was like to come back. How strange it felt. How nothing was quite the same as you remembered, but you were also not the same person who left. We talked about our families and our failures and the things we had let slide that we were trying to reclaim. She told me one evening over dinner that she had kept my number all those years not for any particular reason, just had never deleted it. She said, when she saw the alert she just knew she had to call. She said she almost did not because she was not sure and she was worried about wasting my time. I told her she had wasted 6 hours and 42 minutes of my life. She looked at me with wide eyes, and then I smiled and she understood, and she put her face in her hands and started laughing, that big Priya laugh I had forgotten about, and the whole restaurant looked over. That is the other part of this story, the part that does not fit neatly into a narrative about a neighbor dispute and a kidnapping and a court case. The part where I came home after a long time away and found my way back to people I had let go. The part where the worst thing that happened to me also became the thread that pulled several other things together. I do not want to be falsely tidy about this. The night Marcus was missing was the worst night of my life. Danny went through something as a mother that I do not think she will ever fully stop carrying. Marcus, thankfully, is 4, now 5, and while we have made sure he has talked to someone and we watch for signs of distress, he seems genuinely okay. He has talked about the lady with the stuffed animals a few more times in passing and then moved on, the way kids sometimes do, because his primary concerns are garbage trucks and whether his cereal has enough marshmallows. Kids are resilient in ways that are both comforting and a little heartbreaking to watch. Danny and I are closer than we have been since childhood. Coming home was the right decision, but it took something terrible for me to understand fully what it meant to be present, not just geographically present, but actually there in the ways that mattered. I spend Saturdays with Marcus. I show up for Danny's hard weeks. I call my mom on Tuesdays even when nothing is happening. I am still in this neighborhood. In this house with its dark green shutters that I finally painted because they are my shutters and I wanted them green. The golden retriever from next door comes and sits at my fence sometimes when I am in the yard. His name is Biscuit, and he is spectacular. I think about Carolyn sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. I think about the story she told at the block party, the daughter she lost, the version of her life that did not work out. I think about how someone becomes the kind of person who does what she did. How grief and loneliness and a particular personality can calcify into something dangerous without anyone noticing. I am not forgiving her. I want to be clear about that. She took my nephew. She put my family through 6 hours and 42 minutes of hell, and she did it because she wanted something that was not hers to take. Whatever her reasons were, she knew what she was doing was wrong and she did it anyway. But I also think she was a person who got very lost and had no one to stop her from getting there. And I think about what it means to see people, to actually pay attention before they reach that point. I had warnings about Carolyn, little ones. The jabs and the passive aggression and the way she overstepped, again and again, and I gave her the benefit of the doubt each time because I wanted to believe people were mostly fine. Danny's instincts were right and I dismissed them. I am not beating myself up about that anymore. I understand why I did it and I have made peace with it. But I am more attentive now. I notice more. I trust the feeling in my gut when something is off, even when the person delivering the wrongness has a warm smile and a casserole dish. That is maybe the most useful thing this whole nightmare left me with. That and my green shutters. And Priya's phone number, not deleted, sitting in my contacts where it apparently had been for the better part of a decade, waiting for the one moment when it would matter more than I could have imagined. Marcus turned 5 last month. Danny threw him a garbage truck-themed birthday party, which he had been requesting for 6 months with the kind of focused single-mindedness only small children can sustain. He wore a little orange vest all day. He was so happy he practically glowed. I stood in my sister's backyard watching him run around with his friends, and I thought about the 18 months since I had moved back home. The messy, complicated version of reconnecting with family, which is never as clean as the idea of it. The neighbor who turned into a nightmare. The long court case. The slow work of healing. And this kid. This serious, thoughtful, garbage truck-loving kid who calls me on the phone, sometimes to tell me about things he has seen on the street, just to share it, because we are close in that way now. Because I showed up and I kept showing up. That is the part I hold on to. That is the part that was worth coming home for.